Well, I'm selfishly very glad to have you here, Dana, because I love your books. I've been
Thank
reading
you.
them for quite a while. I've read almost all of them, although I still haven't gotten to this one yet. So I need to get
Oh.
to this series sometime
Well, it is
soon.
kind of fat.
Yeah, that doesn't scare me, but I was just gonna introduce you. I bet everybody here probably is pretty familiar with your books, but I was just briefly gonna say that Dana is from Alaska. She was born in Anchorage, from what I was getting from your website, and you've lived in Alaska most of your life, and she's been publishing since 1991 and has published over 30 books, which is pretty incredible. And something that really impresses me is, she's published successfully in several genres, including mystery, science fiction, historical fiction, and thriller. Am I missing any?
I don't think so. Yeah, no, I think you hit it all.
Yeah, so
So
it's pretty
far.
cool that you're able to shift gears like that so successfully. And then last piece of exciting news, her new book is coming out next week. So I'm really excited to read that one. So yeah, welcome, Dana.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I always do everything librarians tell me to. So when the invitation came, it was an easy yes.
Awesome. Well, we're so glad to have you. So I'm going to ask some questions. Michaela's going to ask some questions. If you guys have questions, feel free to jump in or put them in the chat box. And yeah, so I was going to start with a question about your new book. I'm excited that you're coming back to the Liam Campbell series because I didn't feel like that story was finished. And it's been almost 20 years since you published in that series. And I'm just curious, what made you decide to return to that series for your new book?
Well, it's actually been 16 years. And the reason I left it was because I lost the publisher for it. So, and I had publishers for what else I was writing. So that was what I was concentrating on. And then I wanted to, I don't know, I'd gotten a lot of queries from fans as to what Liam and why we're up to. And so I wrote a Kate Shugak novel. I think it's the 19th novel. It's called Restless in the Grave. And Liam shows up in the park and asks Jim for help on a case that he can't investigate himself because his wife is involved. Y is involved in it. And Jim says, I can't go, but Kate can. So Kate goes to Newenham and eventually to Adak. And when I got done with that book, I thought, there's still more. With the encouragement of fans, I thought I'll just jump back into that series and see what's going on with them.
Awesome, thank you. Michaela, you want to go next?
All right, you have some pretty amazing characters in your novels, and you weave together a really cool, Alaskan, you kind of bring in Alaskan culture, the scenery, the lifestyle into your books.
As much as I humanly can and still tell a story.
Can you discuss Alaska as a character in your books and the importance of setting it in your writing?
Setting, in my opinion, for me, I don't say that this is the way every writer writes, and I wouldn't tell anybody to do this unless they really felt moved to it like I do. Setting is the single most important thing. You have to figure out where your characters live before you can decide who lives there and what they're getting up to. And Alaska is so large and so diverse geographically that people live different lifestyles all over the state. One of the things that I had the best job in the world for a while. I was writing Alaska Traveler, which is a column for Alaska Magazine. Basically, the magazine paid for me to go around the state and write about it. So I got to see more of Alaska than I'd ever previously. I'm South Central, and I went to school in Fairbanks, so interior as well. But that really was, I don't even know, I'm supposed to be some kind of writer and I don't even have a word to describe it, but flying around the state and talking to all the different kinds of people who live in all the different kinds of places, just inspired a lot of plot points, if not outright plots, in all of the Liam Campbell and the Kate Shugak novels. Did that answer your question? I kind of went off on a tangent there.
Yeah, definitely did. And it's interesting because I've always wondered if you just did a lot of research into all of these different parts of Alaska when you were writing your books, or if it just kind of happened naturally during your life. So that's really interesting, because you really touch on like the fishing industry, the crabbing industry, Alaska Native culture, and tribal politics. And there's just so much that you cover in your books. And yeah, that's just interesting. Do you have to do a lot of research for your books?
I honestly, I used to make a joke out of it when people would ask me that question. I would say, as long as people keep misbehaving on the front page of the Anchorage Daily News, I'm in business. Really, all you have to do if you're going to write contemporary fiction set in Alaska is pay attention to what's happening in it. A lot of people ask, there's a lot of hot button issues that I talk on my books, like mining. We're a resource extraction state. We pull stuff out of the ground, we pull stuff out of the water. And I just told somebody else on a Zoom call or on something this morning that really all you have to do is put two Alaskans on a street corner and you're going to have an argument about resource extraction. If you should, if you shouldn't, where you should, how much you should. That's the very stuff of plot, conflict. And God knows there's plenty of it in Alaska.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a hot topic here in Bethel too, because the Donlin mine is, just causing a lot of controversy out here.
You can't get away from it.
No, you can't. So this is a question actually from Ben, who is our writing faculty here at the college, and also I think a budding writer himself. But his question was, who do you think of as the audience for your Alaska novels? Is it challenging to depict an Alaska that will both appeal to the romantic ideas of the outsiders while also staying true to the realities of your family, friends, and neighbors? First of all, I'm writing fiction, Ben. Understand that I never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So I come by my storytelling abilities, what little I have. Honestly, my father was a great storyteller, and he never told the same story the same way twice in his entire life. And I believe that I'm following in his footsteps. Again, I'm right, but I am within those confines, within the confines of the crime fiction genre. There are certain tropes that you have to hit in every book. And I try to, but bottom line is I try to tell as much of the truth as I possibly can and let the chips fall where they may. Do you have any sense of how well your books sell in Alaska versus the rest of the country?
No. I'm sorry, I don't. I do know that the Homer bookstore, yay, always keeps my books in stock, as long as they are, in heart. Some of them are out of print, so they can't keep those in stock, like the first four Liams. But as far as I know, they sell pretty well, but really I don't know how well. I have no idea. If you were going to ask me numbers, I couldn't give you a clue. I have no idea.
I was just curious because I know the reality TV shows about Alaska just seem to be really popular in the lower 48, so I wasn't sure if that carried over to books the same way.
I had a friend who went to India. He visited friends in Chennai, which is it's like on the southeast coast of India. He walked in the door, friends and married with 3 kids, and he walked in the door from Alaska, and the kids were sitting around the television watching The Deadliest Catch. So he thinks that I need to pack a suitcase and go to India and start promoting my books because he says that the market is there.
That's hilarious. Hey, and I see in the chat box that Sue Sheriff, a fellow librarian from elsewhere in the state, has a question. Sue, do you want to come on and ask your question?
Sure. It took me a minute to unmute. Yeah, Dana, because locations are so important in your books, do you think of locations you'd like to incorporate into a plot first, or do you kind of create the plot and then find the locations that you think would fit well with what you have in mind?
I always start with the setting. Always. It doesn't, if I'm writing science fiction, that could be low Earth orbit or the moon or the asteroid belt or Mars. If I'm writing a new series now set in Alexandria in the time of Cleopatra. So 2,000 years ago in Alexandria, Egypt, I always start with a setting first. Then I can figure out who lives there and what kind of trouble I get up to.
Thank you. Michaela, you want to go next?
Yeah, sorry. I'm having a little trouble unmuting myself. All right. So there are some people who are very interested in writing crime fiction. Do you have any tips or any advice for those people?
Funny you should ask that question. I just wrote a little list of sort of a how-to list to write crime fiction or things to watch out for. And the seventh and most important one is every character gets a backstory. I don't care if it's the mailman and all he does is drop a letter off at your front door, or if it's a character that has a subplot through the entire book and that might last beyond that book longer into the series. Every character, it's the ensemble cast is what makes a good book. And the ensemble cast is what gives a series legs. So pay attention to your ensemble cast. The main character obviously has to be great too, but I believe that the ensemble cast has to be equally as great. Or as memorable, anyway.
Never really thought about it that way, but that's really interesting.
Think about the books you love, Teresa. Think about the books you love. It's not just the main character you're going back to visit. It's not. In series fiction, I want to check in with everybody. I want to see how everyone, the ones that are still alive, I want to know how they're doing. I want to know what trouble they're in or not. I want to know what they're up to. I was a reader long before I was a writer, and I love series fiction partly because I can go back and check in with all the characters that I love so much.
Well, that's why it's going to be so fun to have another Liam Campbell book. I read all of the Kate Shugak books first and then went to Liam Campbell, and I was just so disappointed. And then I think there was a period of time where you didn't come out with a book in either of those series for it. So I was really excited.
I was writing other things. Jeez.
This is on my list. So let's see here. So you have some pretty steamy romances in your books that really build over the course of your series. Can you talk a little bit about how to successfully incorporate romance into your books without tipping it into the romance genre?
Relationships are what define us, not just romance, friendships, parental relationships with our kids. And Kate and my characters are generally pretty red-blooded American citizens in the Kate and the Liam series anyway, in the two thrillers. They're going to have sex and they're going to enjoy it. Otherwise, what's the point?
All right, so then I'm going to chime in here. You are a very prolific writer. What does your schedule look like? Because I can imagine you're a pretty busy person.
Well, I'm one of those incredibly fortunate writers. I don't think there are that many of us, statistically speaking, who actually make a living at writing. So I get up every morning and I have an office in my house, and I go straight to work, and I don't stop until I write 5 or 10 pages that day. It depends on where I am in the book as to how much I produce every day. There comes a point when you're writing a book where it's like about 1/3 to 2/3, half to 2/3 of the way through when you're at the top of the mountain. I'm at the top of the mountain. I can see everything laid out in front of me, and I just gallop down to the finish. But it can be a real slog getting to the top of that mountain, as you might imagine, from the metaphor anyway.
Do you have any issues with staying disciplined with your writing?
There have been 2 times in my life when it has been very difficult for me to write, and one was last year. I was thinking to myself, well, hey, a pandemic, I live alone, I work at home, I still have a job that, buys me food. This is a pandemic made for me. Well, it turns out not so much. It turns out I need people just as much as everybody else does. I was 2 months late on this book because it just was so painful to extrude every word. It just took me a lot longer to finish than it ought to have. And I had a really good outline this time. I don't always. And the only thing that I compare it to is how difficult it was to complete A Fine and Bitter Snow after 9/11. It was the same kind of thing. The news has been unremittingly awful for the past year, and it affected me. And I don't think I'm alone in that either.
I think probably everybody in the world feels that way right now.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And audience members, feel free if you have questions to put them in the chat or to unmute yourself at any point if you want to jump in. So I have a question here, which is from a friend and former coworker of mine, Dave, who's also he's a writer, and he's been working, I think, on getting his books published. And he was wondering how much you write that you end up not using, and not necessarily material edited out as much as a concept that doesn't seem to work. So I guess that's kind of confusing, but how much do you write that you end up not using?
It varies from book to book. I'm sorry, Dave, not to be able to give you, a hard and fast reply. There isn't one. I will tell you that when I wrote Breakup, which I think is the 7th Kate Chugach novel, that I was 75 pages into it and it wasn't working, and I scrapped them all and started over. And I think that book, basically the book that came out of that, was a result that I was so mad that Kate wouldn't do what I wanted her to, that I tried to kill her on like every other page. But you have to be ruthless. You have to listen to that little editor that is sitting on your shoulder that tells you when things are going wrong. The book that I'm working on now is called Disappearance of a Scribe. It's the second Eye of Isis novel. And I got to a place where I wrote myself into a corner, and all I could do was go back and edit and find the break where the narrative wandered off course, and so that I could go back and started back on the proper course. And I end up pacing. There's probably about 50 pages after that break. Most of that I will use, but in a different order. So you also have to be alive to keeping the narrative going, because you want to keep the reader's interest. But you have to be strong. That's the last thing in the world that you want to do. I mean, there you are, so many pages in, so many words in, and you're thinking to yourself, oh God, no, don't tell me. Please don't tell me. I have to go back and rewrite or write more or go in a different direction. But you have to do that. You absolutely have to be ruthless with your own work. And if you're not, your editor will be.
Well, that sparks another question for me. How much of your editing do you do yourself versus with an editor? And has that changed as you become a more experienced writer?
Oh, it's changed massively. I used to write, probably back in the early days, I was writing like 7 drafts of a book. I think that was the most I ever did. Now, usually it's 2, at the most 3, if I've really screwed up somewhere. So it does get better. You do get better at this the more you do it.
That's really good to hear. So another question from Dave is, and he's not able to be here unfortunately, but he passed on his questions to me. How much time and effort do you spend on events like this to help you promote your work versus other ways of promoting your work?
I used to go on book tours, and I don't do that anymore. I basically just come to the Poison Pen in Scottsdale because they have a global newsletter they sell all over the world, so people can get signed copies of the hardcover if they want them. So this is probably the most, this past week, I would say is probably the most that I've done events like these. What have I done? 1, 2, 3, 4. This is my 5th one this week. And then there's almost none next week, believe it or not, other than the Facebook Live event on Saturday with Barbara Peters, the owners of the Poison Pen. And then I've got some more the following week. So I'd say there's probably going to be, all told, about a dozen Zooms and Zencasts and Podbeans and I don't know, stuff like that. Facebook Lives, yes, of course. I don't do it anywhere near as much as I used to. I would rather reserve that time for the work. But, you know, I do everything librarians tell me to, which is why I'm here tonight.
So I'm curious, like prior to the pandemic, did you do video calls like this to promote your book or to present to libraries or other organizations?
No, I don't. I don't think I was ever on Zoom before the pandemic. I didn't even. If you'd asked me what Zoom was, I couldn't have told you. But once, we're all getting more Zoom apt and Facebook Live apt. And actually, the very first one of these online meetings I ever had was with my book club, because we couldn't meet in person anymore. So we have a friend who's on Zoom. One of our members is on Zoom, but we also do Facebook Live. It depends on who's going to be attending that day. So that was the first time. That was my first experience with any online event. Other than, a telephone interview.
Can I ask what you're reading for your book club right now?
Oh, shoot. What did we just read? Can I tell you what we just read? God.
Absolutely.
Last month. Actually, it was my pick. I picked The Franchise Affair by Josephine. She's one of my favorite authors. She only wrote, I don't think it was like 7 or 10 books. And The Franchise Affair has a lot to say about life today, in particular social media, even though it is set when she wrote it in 1951. And that's all I'll say. You just go read it for yourselves. It was a very lively discussion. Also, if you're interested, you can go on, I think it's on Facebook Live on the Poison Pen video page, and myself and Val McDermott and Sujata Masi and Barbara Peters of the Poison Pen held a Josephine Tay symposium. We had an hour-long discussion on Josephine Tay books. So if you're interested, you might like to put a link up for your library patrons for that.
That's great to know. I've never even heard of her.
Oh, man. She's written some of my favorite books, and The Franchise Affair, probably the Daughter of Time is probably my favorite of her books, but The Franchise Affair is the one that haunts me. It's all about reputation and how a reputation can be completely and totally destroyed by one unscrupulous person. So you can see how it resonates in the present day. One unscrupulous and very convincing person.
I see that Ben just put in the chat box that he loved The Daughter of Time. I'll have to look and make sure we have those for the library.
Oh, absolutely. You want to get me back to talk about either one of them? I'm here. I won't facilitate, but I'd love to listen in.
Do you have any other favorite authors that you'd like to share with us?
There are so many. If I could figure out a way for somebody to pay me for reading, I'd probably never write another word. That's probably a lie. But what are some books that I've read recently? I just finished the most recent Greg Hurwitz book. I think it's the 7th Orphan X book. There's a guy who knows how to plot. Seriously. And let me see. I just read Paper's Son by S.J. Roseanne, which is an excellent book. A New Yorker goes to the Deep South. And boy, I don't know. I've never been to the Deep South other than, I think, Savannah for a couple of days for a thing. But when you read it, it feels like she's really, really got the accent down without using a lot of dumb diacriticals and, contractions and stuff. It feels very much like she is there, and she brings you there with her. I really recommend that book, Paper Son by S.J. Roseanne. And really the writers that I keep going back to are the writers that I read when I was a kid. I didn't read hardly any kids' books because I was raised on a boat, and my mom had a great big huge cardboard box full of paperbacks that were printed in that day, in the 50s and the 60s. So we're talking people like Neville Shute or Samuel Schellenberger or Anya Seton. I still go back. I still have Neville Shute on my shelf. I still have Georgette Heyer on my shelf. Of more modern authors, I really love P.F. Chisholm's Sir Robert Carey books. I love Stephanie Barron's, Jane Austen, crime fiction novels. I read a lot of nonfiction. I just read the longest biography known to man about Winston Churchill. Oh God, it took me 4 months.
Do you mix up reading nonfiction and fiction pretty evenly?
Yeah, if I'm interested in a topic, then yeah, I'm pretty much, I'll just grab, and I've got like 3 or 4, or sometimes 5 books going at the same time. I just read Blood Air by Alona Andrews. If you like, basically it's urban fantasy. Also, there's a really good writer named Benedict Jacka, who writes the Alex Verus series. It's an urban fantasy set in present day London, more or less. He just came out with his 11th book, and it's his best by far. There's the dog. Sorry. The most recent book is called Forged, but you should definitely, because of all the payoffs in this book that have accrued over the previous 10 books, I really recommend that you read the whole series all the way through. I mean, this is a really good example, a series with a really good example of the long tail, the long view, taking the long view.
I'm so glad we're recording this because I was writing them down and then I was like, I'm just going to go back and look at the recording again.
You know, you asked me about books that I like, and I can go on forever, so you be careful.
Guilty as charged, too. That might be a reason I became a librarian. What were you saying, Michaela?
Well, I was just going to ask, is there like, do you have a certain type, like after you're done writing like a crime fiction novel, you're like, I can't read any more of them? Or are you more like, I have to go read like 3 of the same to see, or like, do you Shakespeare some novels and like, I like what they did, I'm just gonna put that in my pocket for later?
From other crime fiction novels?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if I don't think so. I generally tend to go my own road, and you know, you want to be really careful anyway. You don't want to plagiarize. So, God, I don't know. I can't really answer that question. I don't think so. I'm pretty much going my own road here. But you know, there's only, you know what, Michaela? There's only so many ways you can kill people, number 1. And there are only like about 3 motives. Let me see. There's sex, money, and revenge. And that's about it. And there you are. Or some combination of those 3. So we essentially are telling the same story, all of us, over and over again. So you're going to find plenty of parallels.
What's your favorite way of killing a character in any of your books?
Now you're asking.
Or your most creative kill?
Well, the book that I'm working on right now, you guys are going to love the Ricotta Sandals, but I stole that from real life, so I can't say that. Probably Death by Mosquito. Well, that was in Play with Fire, I think.
That's great. So I have another question. You mentioned that you talk a lot about the business of writing, and since I know we have some people here on the call who are interested in writing or are currently writers, I'm curious if you have any advice on like the business aspect of getting published.
Just a minute, let me wipe my eyes. My eyes are watering. I think it's because of so much screen time. Hang on. Thanks. Okay, so I'm sorry. Your question was about the business of writing, what in particular?
Do you have any advice on sort of navigating the process of getting published for new writers?
Man, right now it's tough. It is, and because it's partly, one of the reasons it's so tough is because there are so many choices out there. You can independently publish. You can go for, the Holy Grail, which is a New York publishing contract if you want to. And then you can do kind of a hybrid thing like I do. I'm partly independently published, I'm partly traditionally published. There's no one right way to do this anymore. If you want to, you can just slap a book up on Amazon and sell it. This is the advice that I have tended over the years to give to authors that I'm not even sure is still the right way to go. Number one, find a local writers conference and start going, because almost all writers conferences now include agents and editors in their speakers. So you can actually hear about business as it is actually done. They are also a lot more often now inviting independently published authors, because they are becoming more and more successful and have more and more of a profile, and people want to hear what they have to say as well. Before, it was anathema to writing conferences. They would never let independent writers come and speak, but that is changing. And then my other piece of advice is write every day. Just write every single day. I don't care if it's only one sentence a day. It's a sentence more than you had the day before. By the end of the month, you'll have a chapter, hopefully.
That's really interesting. So I was going to ask you at the end to talk a little bit about your nonprofit Story Knife, but since you were just talking about, writers' conferences, can you talk a little bit about resources available in Alaska for writers that you're familiar with, such as Story Knife and others?
Homer has in my opinion, oh God, I hope I'm not killed for saying this out loud. Homer has, in my opinion, the best writers conference in Alaska. It's called the Catchment Writers Conference. And I don't actually know if it's happening this year or not. I'm not sure that it will, if they've made that decision yet or not. It was canceled, I think, last year because of COVID, like everything else was. So I really recommend that. Come down to Homer. It's held at Land's End. And eventually we'll be getting back to that. And they always have amazing speakers. I mean, writers whose names Amy Tan was there. Google them, look at their website, and they will. And Jane Smiley was there a couple of years ago. She was fabulous. That's something that you want to go to, because when you're a beginning author, you don't know anything. Nobody teaches you anything about the business of writing. It's something that has always bothered me. I have an MFA from the University of Alaska in creative writing. They don't tell you anything about how to get published. There's just you have to learn it the hard way, everything the hard way. So if you go to an event like the Catchment Writers Conference or any legitimate writers conference, not just a bunch of writers sitting together talking, well, that doesn't hurt either. Then you're going to meet other people who are behind you, who are ahead of you, and who are at your level. You can talk shop and you can learn stuff. There's also a couple of things, and this is kind of blowing my own horn, but if you go to Stabenow.com and Google Dana on Writing, or search Dana on Writing, there's one blog post that's called Going Independent. It was a keynote speech I gave at our writers conference, the Oklahoma Writers Conference. I can't remember when. It's dated now, but it's still, a lot of it is still really relevant. One of them is, anyway, look for those two. Look for, just search writing on Stabenow.com. And you know what, Teresa, if you want, I can look those up myself and send you links, and you can post them somewhere.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, that's better than me trying to, scrape it out of my brain cells, which I'm obviously not doing a very good job of.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious about getting the MFA. Were you already a published author when you got the MFA, or did you get published afterwards?
I was working up on the slope. I was working for BP, and there came a time in my life when I thought, okay, it's time to fish or cut bait. Do you want to write or not? My undergraduate degree was in journalism, but it was pretty obvious from like about 2 seconds after I got that degree that I had no ability to ask the hard question, and I wasn't going to be any kind of a journalist if I couldn't. So, but I did think that I wanted to write fiction, and I thought, okay, I've been out of school for a long time. I need to be reminded how to write on deadline and how to research. So I went back to school and I got my master's degree, and my goal was to be published before I ran out of my savings, which I just barely did.
Were you working on, when you were getting your MFA, were you working on any of your novels that have since been published?
Oh, no. I was working on the Great Alaskan Novel. That was my, my thesis. And it's what got me my degree, but it will never see the light of publishing day because it's just not good enough. I'm glad it got me my degree.
That's good to know. So I'm curious, do you see this, like doing Zoom things like this with libraries around the state? Is that something that you think you'll be willing to continue doing after the pandemic? It's been nice for us here in Bethel now that it's become a little more normalized. We've actually had more author events in the last 6 months than we typically, maybe at the most with the cost, we'd have one author or two a year. So it's been nice for us in rural Alaska to be able to do this kind of thing.
I don't think Zoom is ever going away. I think we're all used to it now. I think we're all marginally apt at it now. And I don't think life as we knew it pre-pandemic is going to be, the same. And I think there are probably going to be a lot of Zoom and Facebook Live and all the rest of it events in all of our lives, not just writers' lives, not just library lives, but yeah. And if you were asking me, am I okay with that? I totally am. Yep.
How do you do you think the COVID-19 and the pandemic is going to influence, because it has influenced a lot of media in like the past few months because people are trying to, make progress and like keep putting out content. Do you think you will include anything from this past year in any of your work?
I don't know. Believe me, I thought about it. I think all writers are thinking about it. Some of them have just said flatly, no, there's no way I am writing this into any of my books. I don't know. I can't say for sure. If a good storyline came up that included it, but I don't know. Michaela, I think I think it's gonna probably be in the rear view of my characters, I think. But don't hold me to that.
One positive thing that I'm hoping will come out of this pandemic is I really do think that a time like this can spark the creativity of a lot of people. So I'm hoping that there's a boom in, new writers and art forms. And, I'm hoping that will be a positive impact, hopefully, of this really terrible year.
Yeah, I think it will be for a lot of people.
So do we have any audience questions? Go ahead, Mylene.
Okay. Hi, Dana. I'm Mylene from Catchment. And my mom always said that, and this might not be true, it may, but if I don't ask, I'll never know. So is it true that you haven't sold the rights to your story, to like a movie right, because they can't film in Alaska?
I did actually. The Kate Chugach novels in particular have been optioned. I think it's 7 times now, and I thought I had found someone who would actually film it in Alaska, but it didn't happen. And frankly, I gave notes on I don't know how many scripts, and you and I are very happy that it didn't. Because
did you pass up some good offers though? I mean, I can imagine.
You don't really sell the rights. What happens is they option them, and then the good money comes. And it's pretty good. The option money can be pretty good. It was anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 for me, and but the real money comes if the script is produced, i.e., if it is made into a film or a television series. So I never got that far. The options just, they would come up with. I would give notes. They would pay me for that too, which was nice. and it just never made it to filming. And at this point, I'm fine with that, and I'm at a place in my life where I don't really need the money from screen rights. And I think after my experience with Hollywood, I have to say that I think Sue Grafton was right. I don't know if you guys know who Sue Grafton is, right? She wrote the A for Alibi, B. She wrote the Alphabet Murders, Kinsey Mahone. Yep. And I interviewed her at a BoucherCon one time, and she said flatly, she just said it, and to where, she was making a statement, and there was no arguing with her about it. She came originally from screenwriting to novel writing, and she enjoined her heirs from ever selling screen rights to the Kinsey Milhone series, because she knew she had personal experience of what happened when a book was sold to become a film. Now, you can always find books that have been treated really well in Hollywood. I mean, like the one that we all think of is To Kill a Mockingbird. Or, for example, I think a really well-made film from a book is Thomas Kinsella's Shoeless Joe was turned into Field of Dreams. But those are and the best one ever is Michael Connelly's Lincoln Lawyer. It's the best cast, the best written, the best film book adaptation ever. So I really strongly recommend you watch that if you can. But most of the time, that is not the case. And I love books, and I love the writers who write them. And I hate seeing what happens to them when they're put up on screen. Yeah, you make a lot of money, but I don't know. For me, it's not worth it. I know everybody wants to see it up on screen. I get that all the time from the Dana Maniacs. But man, what you see on screen is not necessarily what's in the books you love. But that's just me.
I think it's better to not have it on screen if they're not going to do it really well.
I agree. I mean, but you don't have any, who was it? Joseph Wambaugh, the book that he loved the most, I think, of all his books was called The Onion Fields. And he hated what they did with his first couple of books. They made films, I think, I can't remember the names of them, but he hated those books. I heard him say at a conference one time, and he retained the screen rights to The Onion Field until he had enough power in Hollywood to get it made the way he wanted it made, until he had creative control. Now, if I could have creative control, it'd be a different story, but I don't have that kind of muscle.
I think a good example is like Game of Thrones, which I know has been so popular, but as a fan of the novels, it was really frustrating when he just turned it over to a TV series, and I haven't heard anything about him publishing another book. So it's kind of a cop-out. So don't do it if you're not going to do it, if they can't do it well.
Well, at one time I would have killed to have Irene Bedard play Kate Shubak. She was just perfect. She was just like, and so now in my mind, she's Kate to me. She is the screen Kate to me. And and she has probably aged out of the part by now. So really, I don't see anybody else coming up. That I've seen suggestions that people have said to me, what about her? And I've gone and looked them up on IMDb, and I'm thinking, nope, that's not Kate.
She's probably one of my favorite characters she's one of the top 10 probably out of all the books I've read. She's just so fabulous. Do you have any favorite characters out of your books?
It's probably, I like the ensemble cast. I mean, I love Bobby. I don't know where he came from. Bobby in the Kate Shubak series. I love Bill in the Liam Campbell series, and Moses. I love Kate, but honest to God, she doesn't really feel like mine anymore. She feels like she's her own person. I mean, I've written her for so long now. I know her so well that she kind of knows what she's going to say. She and Jim both they're very, very well-developed characters, and they almost speak in their own voices. And that may sound sophist to you, but it really feels like that when I'm writing them.
Do we have any other audience questions?
is Sue again in Fairbanks, and this is this is not to do with riding, but where were you riding a camel in the picture on your website?
It was either China, Western China, or Egypt. I can't remember. I think it was Western China. I'm not sure. Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region.
Yeah, me too.
I went to China to research silk and song. I basically traveled the Silk Road, not on a camel, starting from Xi'an all the way over to Kashgar. So because I didn't feel like I could write a book set in the Silk Road if I hadn't traveled at least part of it.
Cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was a great trip.
On a couple of occasions, I've heard you give a tribute to your childhood library in Seldovia, and you've always been very supportive of libraries. And as a librarian, I really appreciate your voice. Your voice.
I would not be the person I am today without Susan English in my life. She was a friend of my mother's. My mother was a big reader too. And the library was only open one time a week, Mondays, 7 to 10, one room underneath the city hall. And you could only check out 4 books at a time. And when she figured out how, much avid a reader I was, and when Mom told her how fast I was reading, she started letting me take out 8 books at a time. No, Susan made me who I am today. Susan and my mother between them.
That's great to hear. Librarians always love it when authors are supportive of libraries.
Well, you treat us so well, and because you hand our books to people. Come on.
So I'm curious, do you have any other books in the works that you'd be interested in talking about briefly?
The book that I'm working on now is called Disappearance of the Scribe. It's the second in the Eye of Isis series. And then I'm going to go immediately to writing the third book, which is called Theft of an Idol, which doesn't mean what you think it means. That's all I'll say. I am just having like the best time in the world writing in Alexandria 2,000 years ago. For one thing, I'm rehabilitating the character of Cleopatra because, all the contemporary sources that wrote about Cleopatra were supported by Octavian or Augustus Caesar, who he basically looted Alexandria in order to buy himself a throne in Rome. And the woman tempted me and I ate it is the oldest of tropes, and they redid it there. They rewrote Cleopatra's history, and I never did buy into that reading of her story. So it's really fun for me it's the books right now in time are right after Caesar has left Alexandria. And she's just given birth to Caesarion. And it was about 18 months before she went to Rome, and then Caesar was assassinated. And you can fit a lot in the 18 months in crime fiction. So and I have discovered in all the research that I have done that there are many, many parallels to Alexandria 2,000 years ago and the present day. And it has been enlightening, to say the least, and definitely inspiring to write in this time period. I'm so enjoying it. And I'm learning so much, which is also fun.
Well, I'm excited to read those.
I'm loving writing them.
Yeah, no, I love historical fiction too. It's so fun. Have you done a lot of research for those books, into the history of that time?
I managed to beat feet into Egypt in December 2018, which right before the pandemic. Or 2019, excuse me, right before the pandemic. And, but I wrote the first book before I went. So it was very good for me to go and look at what I was writing about. In the meantime, if I were at home, I would hold the laptop so that you could see my shelves filled with research books. And I've gotten rid of a lot of them because I'll skim through them to see if they're going to be useful and then set aside the ones that won't and keep the ones that will. But I have a ton, I have an atlas of the classical Mediterranean. But I could like really dive down a rabbit hole with that. I mean, I could just open up and get lost because I love maps. And I mean, it seems like every second biographer out there has written a biography of Cleopatra. Not all of them are great, but some of them are very good. I do, however, keep coming back to this book. It's the Stacy Schiff biography of Cleopatra. It was what finally moved me after I've been thinking about it for years. It was the book that finally moved me to, okay, here's somebody who thinks about Cleopatra like I do. I'm not alone. Maybe I can write these books after all. So I did.
Very cool. So we're getting close to the end here, and I would love to hear a little bit about Story Knife, your nonprofit, and what you guys are doing down there.
Story Knife was inspired by the first thing that my writing ever earned me was a residency at Hedgebrook Farm, which at that time was the only retreat for women writers in the world. And I was there for 2 weeks because I didn't have enough confidence to ask for more. I was there with a poet, a woman who writes magical fiction, and someone who had published like 30 young adult not chapter novels, I think is what librarians call them. It's in between the picture books and the young adult novels, that's chapter books, right? Okay, so there were 3 different genres there with me, and they were the first time I ever met other writers and other people who were in the same place that I was as a writer, as well as people who had already been published and I could talk shop to. It was the seminal moment in my life as a writer. It was the thing that changed everything for me. I left Hedgebrook knowing I was going to be published, and I left, and I think it was October, and the following January I sold my first book. So I left with an obligation, a sense of obligation. I mean, what can I do? What can I do that was just, I lived in the most beautiful cottage. I had meals prepared for me. I had lunch delivered to my door. And I have always wanted to be able to give back in some way to that larger writing community. And so for their 25th anniversary, Hedgebrook invited me down, and they told me at that time they could have as many as 1,400 applications for 40 spaces. And I thought, that's not enough. So I built Story Knife, and I have 6 cabins, and 12 cabins altogether is not enough either, but an additional 6 is what I could do. So we were supposed to open last April, and of course COVID, nope. So we're opening this year in June, and we'll be open from June to my executive director, Erin Hollowell, just emailed me, texted me last week and said, we've got everything all set up. We rolled the authors from last year over into this year, and also some of them into 2022 because the people who were coming last year, some of them couldn't come this year. So there will be 6 writers in 6 cabins from the 1st to the 28th of June, July, August, September, and October. And they'll spend the days in their cabin working, and then in the evenings, they will come together at dinner in the main house where they can sit around and talk shop and tell war stories and learn from each other. And we hope form a community like Hedgebrook's of writers that will help each other through the years to come in their profession.
That's amazing. Are the writers primarily from Alaska?
Not primarily, but I'm going to jam as many Alaskan writers in there as I possibly can. It's women only. It's for women writers only. But yes, we had last year, one woman was coming from the Philippines. So they're coming from all over the world.
That's awesome. Just for everybody on the line, I did put a link. If you want to make a donation towards her nonprofit, there is a link in the chat box. You can also find it by Googling Story Knife.
Thank you.
It just sounds like such an amazing service to be able to offer to other female writers. So kudos to you.
It made the difference for me. It made the difference, all the difference for me. There was Susan English when I was younger, and there was Hedgebrook when I was older, and the 2 of them together, that's why I am who I am today. I'm hoping other writers will come out of Story Knife saying exactly the same thing, only insert Story Knife for Hedgebrook.
That's great. So we have a couple minutes left. Does anybody else have any other questions that they want to ask Dana?
This is Ben. I'm kind of curious. You left us, I guess, in suspense, which is what you do. But what are the other 5 tips for writing crime fiction?
Oh. You'd make me open it up. I can't just think of them over the top of my head. I have to have a script. It'll be on Writer's Digest at some point, and then after a certain amount, I think 30 days, I'll be posting it to my blog. So watch for it there on stabenow.com, the blog.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure. And look for those and Ben, look for, I'm going to find the 2 pieces that I was talking to Teresa about before. I'm going to send her the links, and so ask her for the links. She can pass them on to you.
It kind of looked like Mary Weisenbaugh was trying to say something. Were you trying to ask a question, Mary? Not to put you on the spot, but...
Microphone now, is that it?
There we go. We can hear you now.
Okay. I was wanted to ask Dana if, when she was doing all that research, did you visit Southeast Alaska and some of the little fishing villages?
In Southeast Alaska?
Yes.
I've been to, I think I've mostly, I haven't been into the little villages. I was raised in a small village, Seldovia. That's South Central, but I've been to all the big towns like Ketchikan, Sitka, Wrangell, Petersburg,
Okay.
Juneau. Yeah, I wouldn't mind going to.
So you were on Baranof Island then, if you went to Sitka, but you weren't on Chichagof, which is where Teneke is, and that's where this library is visiting you today.
I've been to Pelican.
Teneke.
Yes.
Teneke Springs.
I heard you. Yeah. No, I haven't.
Teresa is here.
Okay. Well, if I get down that way, I'll stop in.
Sure. They would be thrilled to see you.
I was raised in a small town. I love small towns. Happy to visit them wherever I can.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I enjoyed your information today. It's a good time for you to visit.
Thank you. It was good for me too, Right. Remember that writers work alone and all alone, all by themselves. And it's not because we like public speaking. It's because we're used to being cooped up alone, chained to our laptops. So this is really the only way that I get to talk to people who read my books. So it's kind of fun for me too. So thanks for that.
Does anybody else have any last questions for Dana? The joys of Zoom, waiting for somebody to unmute their thing.
Yeah. Yes. I still do that. As many Zoom calls as I've been on now, I still do that. Oh, unmute.
I know. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today, Dana. It's been really fun, and I really am excited to read your new book and to get caught up on the books of yours that I haven't read yet.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Like I said, it's not all one-sided. I really enjoyed it too. And I'll get those links to you right away.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Back at you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. I'm going to go ahead and click end. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Teresa.
Thanks, Teresa.
Thank you for all coming.